Good evening, Mr. Bond fans. It is September 2023, and by the end of this month, we will have an official new James Bond video game.
You know, I think a celebration's in order.
Kinda.
You'll forgive me for not putting up the bunting.
To say this caught me off guard would be a massive understatement, so I think most Bond game fans will be aware that there is currently a game being developed by IO Interactive, makers of the Hitman series. It was announced back in 2020 and we still know next to nothing about it, other than we're still probably a long while off it actually being released. And then on the flip side of that, we have this Cypher 007, a game that no one knew was coming and is now out in a matter of weeks. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining, but after waiting all of those extra years for No Time to Die to come out, we're waiting all these years for the IO Interactive game to come out, I'm just conditioned at this point to expect at least half a decade in between a Bond thing being announced and then released. Cypher 007 is published by Tilting Point. It is to be released on Apple Arcade and is described as being a top-down action-adventure game inspired by 60 years of spycraft. Cypher 007 will put the players in the shoes of James Bond as you revisit some of his most iconic moments. The criminal mastermind Blofeld and head of Spectre has once again hatched a plan to sabotage his arch-enemy James Bond. This time he has utilised brainwashing techniques known as the Mind Trap, holding Bond captive in a mental prison in an attempt to turn him into the ultimate double agent. Play as Agent 007 on his most challenging mission yet. Escape the Mind Trap, defeat Blofeld, and put an end to the Cypher program. So in terms of the story, I mean, a brainwashed Bond immediately takes me to Ian Fleming's The Man with the Golden Gun, and then playing through classic Bond film scenes takes me back to 007 Legends. And indeed, in the trailer for Cypher, you can see Little Nelly from You Only Live Twice, the London Tube Network, presumably from Skyfall. Q's Lab is here from Spectre. I mean, classic characters. There's Jaws, there's Blofeld, there's Red Grant, Alec Trevelyan, Stamper, Necros, Eric Kriegler. There's a focus on this Mind Trap thing, which I'm guessing is going to be a device. Like, most of the game is going to be you playing through missions that are kind of going on in James Bond's head. And then I assume that the end of the game is basically going to be Bond waking up and he is in reality again. And that is the vehicle that they're going to use to get Bond into these past missions and battling these past villains. I have to admit, the first thing that really stood out to me about this announcement was the art style of the game. I mean, this stylized, cartoony kind of look to some of the character designs in the world. They're obviously not going for realism with the look of this thing, which is kind of the first Bond game in a very long time to look like this. I mean, generally with the advancement of graphics, Bond games have always strived to look exactly like the films, and this is quite a departure, but one that I actually quite like, particularly as we're in this weird hiatus period in the Bond film series, and there's no current house visual style for the game to emulate, nor a house Bond for that matter, which brings me to my next point. Make room on the couch, Agent Under Fire Bond and GoldenEye Rogue Agent Bond, you have company. Judging from the artwork, I think we have an original character design for James Bond, I think. I mean, there is this image in the trailer which looks an awful lot like Roger Moore to me, but the image of who I assume is Bond on the main holding page on the Apple Arcade looks like someone else entirely. I mean, mention is made in the description about unlocking character model outfits, so I guess maybe you start off as an original looking Bond, but then you can unlock cartoony avatars of all the past Bonds as you go? I don't know though, it seems like a bit of a weird mixed bag of likenesses. I mean, Jaws looks just like Richard Kiel, but the MI6 gang pop up, and the broad strokes of their designs are clearly like, you know, Judi Dench, Desmond Llewellyn, Naomi Harris inspired, but I wouldn't say that any of them especially look exactly like those actors. I don't think there's an attempt to replicate those actors' likenesses here. It wouldn't surprise me if the softer, more animated look was a choice of necessity to comply with the Apple Arcade store and look a bit more family friendly. It's interesting that the 007 logo for the advertising does not include the gun component, which, you know, again, I do just assume that there are rules about such things when advertising a game for a 12+ audience, which apparently contains infrequent mild cartoon or fantasy violence, infrequent mild realistic violence, infrequent mild mature suggestive themes.
I hope we're going to have some gratuitous sex and violence.
Oh, sorry, we're fresh out of gratuitous. Might I interest you in some infrequent mild cartoony fantasy sex and violence instead? Anyway, who cares what it looks like so long as it plays great, right? So yeah, this is an Apple Arcade game that you'll be able to play on your iPhone, so I'm kind of expecting the gameplay to be a little on the basic side. To be honest, where my mind immediately went when I first saw the trailer was back to the Game Boy Advance version of Everything or Nothing, that kind of top-down, like camera stays at this angle position kind of thing, and to be honest, if the game is kind of a modern equivalent to that, I'm not complaining. That's a game that I enjoyed very much playing on car journeys and on the move when it first came out back when I was a tween. I'll admit to being somewhat somewhat cautious about going into this. My expectations of what to expect are seriously tempered. I don't think this will be challenging GoldenEye, Nightfire, Everything or Nothing to be anybody's favorite Bond game anytime soon, but I do think it's really cool that we're getting a new Bond game with a super short build-up, and if this game can provide a sweet distraction for an hour or two, then fine. Sign me up. And signing up is something I will literally have to do to play this game. Now, the game has only been announced for Apple Arcade so far. This is a subscription-based service, and I have to admit to have never actually signed up for it myself. Obviously, I will be doing so for the purpose of playing this game, and I guess I'll be mainly playing it on my Mac at home, but who knows, maybe I'll be playing it on the go on my commute as well. It might make a nice break from reading nothing but John Gardner books for the last few years. And besides, however this game turns out, it has to be better than that damned James Bond World of Espionage mobile game from a few years ago. Actually, game might be a bit of a generous term to apply to it. This came out in 2015, and it was a menu-based role-playing game. It pretty much existed solely to promote Spectre, which was coming out in cinemas at the time, but it's saying something that a new Bond game came out, and I had no interest in playing it at all. I have never played it, and the servers for it were shut down about a year and a half after it was released, so it's pretty much a lost bit of James Bond media, folks. There are a couple of videos that show gameplay on YouTube, and I'll link to one below, but damn, does that thing look bad. It is seemingly, to my eye, comprised entirely of Skyfall promo material, Getty images, and just an onslaught of numbers. I have no idea what I'm looking at when I watch this gameplay. I'm just glad that Bond mobile games have seemingly evolved over the last 8 years. Anyway, back to Cypher. I'll be completely honest with you, I didn't exactly feel hype when I saw the trailer for this. I just kind of got like a okay, I'm intrigued reaction out of me. I will obviously be playing the game and making a video about it, but my expectations are set for what it is likely to be and not to be. It is not the IO interactive game that I think so many of us are anticipating to crazy levels, but it may well end up being a fun, quirky little game, and, you know, there's mention of competing against other agents around the world, so if there's like a leaderboard or some kind of competitive element, that might be fun. Given that this is going to be live on the Apple Arcade and will likely end up disappearing from the server after however many years, I will consider this game to be a success if in a few years' time, when it vanishes completely and no one can play it anymore, we all feel a collective tinge of sadness at the loss of another fun 007 time killer, but only time will tell. So that's where I'm at with this. I'm kind of at the cautiously optimistic stage of anticipation. I wish that I could have come to this video with an explosion of enthusiasm. Not that kind of explosion of enthusiasm, but can the same be said for you? Please do let me know your thoughts about this announcement in the comment section below. Are you going to be playing the game? Are you excited? Are you an Apple Arcade user generally, and you kind of have a better idea of what to expect than me for this thing? I'd be really curious to hear. Please do let me know below. And also below, there's the usual links to my social media pages. There are buttons to subscribe to this channel, and the Mrs. Bell button to stay super up to date on future video uploads, so please do click those if you're interested in, particularly if you're interested in hearing me talk about this game when it's finally released. As I say, I'll have a video up discussing my initial thoughts, and with all that being said, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.